little bit of extra help. Hang on.
There we go. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Now we start the 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So now, actually 9. Yeah. So now we start actually part 2 of Maseches Pesachim. Today is Daf Nun Ches, right? Noach part Nun Ches in Maseches Pesachim, and now we basically get to the Kudshim part of Pesachim. No more discussing of Chametz. Basically, for the next 5 prakim, we're going to deal with a lot of Kudshim. So now, just one prerequisite when we speak about today's daf, we're going to talk about the zmanim of when the Talmid ben Arbayim, the two, there's a morning Talmid and an afternoon Talmid. So we're going to talk about what time that Talmid is brought. So we talk about that in terms of Shabbos Manios. So, and then the time is actually the beginning. So hour 1 is going to be, right, that would be at 6 a.m. Hour 7, right, is at 12 o'clock. So, right, that's the beginning of the 7th hour, so on and so forth. So we're going to discuss about 8.5 hours and 9.5 hours, but that's what we're referring to. So 8.5 would be at 2:30, right? Is that it? 2:30? Or am I throwing myself off? No, excuse me. 8.5 would be at 1:30. 1:30, right? And 9.5 would be at 2. No, 1 second. 9.5 actually 1 second. 7th hour would be at 12. 8 hour would be at 1. Correct. Yeah. So fine. Let's see. So we say over here. Excuse me, I said that wrong. I almost started again. Right. The amount of it's amount of hours afterwards. So 1 hour would be at 7, right? That was the confusing, right? Just double confuse myself, right? So 9.5 would actually be at 3:30. 8.5 would be at 2:30. 7.5 would be at 1:30. 6.5, when we discuss, is 6.5 hours basically after sunrise. So the amount of time is the amount of time after sunrise. Sunrise we'll assume is at 6 a.m. So anyways, now we can start. So top of the page on Nun Ches Amud Aleph. Talmid nishchat b'shmona umechza. The Talmid ben Arbayim, the one in the afternoon that is shechted at the 8.5 hours afterwards, which would be at 2:30. The karev b'tisha b'umechza, and then is offered at 9:30. So everything we discussed today, we don't explain why. Basically, there was an hour between the time that it was shechted and it was offered. So there's an hour between. So the Talmid was shechted at the 8.5 hour mark and it was offered the 9th. Now, there's going to be 4 possible dates we're going to discuss today, and it's all one long sugya. All right. So one is a regular day. Case number 2, but Arvei Pesachim. Now, Arvei Pesachim was a little different because they want to go ahead and do the Ben Arbayim a little bit earlier because they needed time to do the only korban ever that to be brought after the second time of the Ben Arbayim is the korban Pesach. So they want to move it a little earlier so there's more time for people to bring the korban Pesach. Now, Arvei Pesachim, Nishchat b'Sheva Mechza, the korban b'Shmona Mechza, Bein b'Chol, Bein b'Shabbos. So on Erev Pesach, they're going to go ahead and shecht it on the 7th, right, during the 7th hour, and they offer it at 8.5 hours. So basically move it 1 hour up on Erev Pesach. Bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbos. Whether Erev Pesach is a Shabbos or a weekday. Okay, so there's going to be 4 basically. Let's say there's 4 options. Okay, there's actually almost about 5 practically. There's going to be a regular day. Okay, then there is Erev Pesach. Okay, because Erev Pesach is unique for the Talmid. Now that can be either a Shabbos or a weekday, but there's one other day. Chal Erev Pesach liyos be'erev Shabbos. Okay. Now the tricky thing is, if Erev Pesach falls out on Erev Shabbos, so then nishchat b'sheish mechza. Then if Friday, right, is Erev Pesach, then nishchat b'sheish mechza v'kara b'shiva mechza. Then it's actually even brought earlier. They need more time before the Pesach Acharav, and then you bring the Korban Pesach afterwards. Because now remember, the unique thing about Shabbos, why does it come into play? Why does Shabbos make a difference? Because you have to go ahead and roast your Korban Pesach. So if it's a Friday, you have to have it completely roasted before Shabbos. Okay, and if Shabbos is Erev Pesach, then basically they shecht it, but they don't roast it right until once Shabbos starts. So that's going to be those factors are going to come into play. So that was the Mishnah. So we brought down the regular Tamid, regular day. Erev Pesach, said the second part of the Mishnah, Erev Pesach doesn't make a difference whether it's Shabbos or it's a weekday. When I say weekday, not including Friday. When it's a weekday, let's say a Tuesday or a Monday, right? And if Erev Pesach is even Erev Shabbos, is moved even up, so that will be at the 6.5 hours, and it was basically offered at 7.5 hours. That was when the Tamid is brought. Fine, let's see. Minoni Mili Zakta Gemara. So I'm Rabbi Shimon Levi. The Amar the pasuk says, "Esa kevesach adaseh b'boker, v'esa kevesach sheni taseh bein harabayim." So it says they bring one Tamid in the morning and one in the afternoon, bein harabayim. So what does it mean? Chalkul levein shnei arav, right? Basically, go ahead and take this afternoon one, the one in the afternoon, and make it 2 afternoons. So basically, the way it works is there's 6 hours in the afternoon, okay, and basically divide it in half, but it takes 1 hour to offer. So take out the hour in the middle, and therefore you have 2.5 hours before and 2.5 hours afterwards. So therefore, basically bring it in the middle. The hour of the is brought in the middle, and if it's in the middle of 6 hours, basically you have 2.5 in front, 2.5 afterwards, and therefore at hour 8.5. Between 8.5 and 9.5 is when the Ben Arbaim is brought. So Mesiv Rava it says, look at the mission, it says Barab Psachim Nishchat B'Sheva Mechza V'Kar B'Shemona Mechza Bein B'Chol Bein B'Shabbos. And if Erev Pesach falls out, and when Erev Pesach comes, you go ahead and you bring in an hour earlier. You don't do it between 8.5 and 9.5. Rather, you do it between 7.5 and 8.5. And if it's deraisa that it has to go ahead, and the Tamid Ben Arbaim has to be exactly in the middle of the afternoon, i.e., between 8.5 and 9.5 hours. So then, how could you move it when it if it's Erev Pesach, right? If the Torah says it has to be in the middle, it has to be in the middle. Can't change it. So Rava gives a different shot. Mitzvah of the Tamid Mishentelet Salelo Erev, right? The mitzvah of the Tamid is to be brought in the afternoon when the afternoon shadow is already creeping up, right? In my time, what's the reason? The pasuk says Ben Arbaim Me'ino Damaschil Shim Shalom Aret, when the sun begins to go west, to set. Hilkach Liver B'Shai Mosashana Dika Nadaron Davos, other days of the year, when you have to bring other karbanos. Right, the karbanos people have to, let's say, bring separate karbanos. So those are not brought in Shabbos. So those are brought in the rest of the days of the year. And over there, the Torah says, and then you bring the fats of the shlamim. We learn from over there that the Tamid, right, should be the one that completes all the karbanos. Therefore, we go ahead and basically we delay. Right. In other words, after the morning Tamid is brought and before the second one, all the other karbanos are brought. So therefore, in order to basically give them time, we give them 2.5 hours. Right. We give 2 hours. So therefore, do it at 8.5 hours. However, on Erev Pesach, that you have to go ahead and bring the Korban Pesach afterwards. So therefore, instead of being at 8.5 hours, we move it up to 7.5 hours. And Chal Erev Pesach Erev Shabbos. And however, if Erev Pesach is also a Friday. Therefore, you have to go ahead and roast it completely before Shabbos. Therefore, you need more time. Therefore, we go ahead and move it to the earliest possible time of when the shadow begins, because basically at the 6th hour, right, there is no shadow. It's only, after a half hour, the shadow begins. So therefore, at the 6.5 hour point is when it is brought. Fine. So we explained why the Ben Arbaim is brought in the afternoon, because he has to have the shadow, and it's flexible because it just has to be in the afternoon, at least after 6.5 hours of when there's already the shadow from the sun beginning to set in the west. Fine. Tana Rabbana. Now, Kasidro. Now we're going to have a brisa. All right. We're going to have 3 different explanations, a couple kashas, and then we're going to have, and then that's going to be the sugya. So let's see. Tana Rabbana. So we have this brisa which is sort of vague. It says Kesidro b'chol, kach sidro b'Shabbos. Divir Rabbi Shmuel. Says Rabbi Shmuel, the Tamid during the week, okay, the regular Tamid, right, is the same as Shabbos. Divir Rabbi Shmuel. And Rabbi Kiva Omer Kesidro b'Erev Pesach. No, it's like Erev Pesach. All right, so that was sort of the vague. So now my kamar, what's pshat over here? So I'm Rabbi. So Abaye gives the first shot. He says, "Hachi kamar," means to say, "Kasidro b'chol b'erev Pesach, kachsidro b'Shabbos erev Pesach." Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, right? The seder of the Tamid, right, on Erev Pesach, a weekday Erev Pesach, is the same as the Seder of if Erev Pesach is Shabbos. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva Omer, and therefore basically it comes out the normal time, but basically which should be at 7.5 hours because it's moved up because Erev Pesach we say is always moved up to 7.5 hours. And Rabbi Kiva Omer, Kasidra be'erev Pesach shachal liyais be'erev Shabbos, Kasidra b'Shabbos. He says if just like Erev Pesach on Friday is at so the Erev Pesach that falls on Friday is the same as Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, and therefore, or Shabbos is just like the one on Erev Pesach, and therefore it's both at 6.5 hours because it has to be reserved before. Umasnis in our Mishnah, the Tani Bein B'chol Bein B'Shabbos, or Shmuel in our Mishnah, which says that Erev Pesach doesn't matter whether it's Shabbos or a regular weekday. Now, remember, when I say regular weekday, I'm not referring to Fridays. All right, just remember that. When it comes out on Shabbos or Friday, Shabbos or a weekday, right? Then there's no difference, and that would be the Rabbi Shmuel would be the Tana of our Mishnah. So, and the my kamifli, what's the machlokes between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel? The musafin koidmin lebezichin kamifli. The machlokes is now we have we talk about the lechem panim that's left week to week. And then the bread is taken by the Kohanim on every Shabbos. However, it's only taken on Shabbos after the levona, the frankincense, which is on the spoons, is there a week, and then it's removed there and is put on the mizbeach, and therefore then the challahs are taken. So that matters the breads. So in other words, so Musaf, and also on Shabbos we have extra karbonos that are brought, the Musaf for Shabbos. So Musafin kaidin lebezichin kamifli. The machlokes says which comes first, the Musaf, which is brought always between hours of 11 and 12, between basically the 5th hour, right? 5 to 6. So the kaidin lebezichin kamifli. Rabbi Shmuel Savar must be kaidin lebezichin. He holds the Musaf in our first. So therefore, aval Musafin b'sheish, and therefore that is done during the 6th hour. And the zichin b'sheva, and therefore the zichin, which is a half hour, the karbanos are an hour, and the zichin is a half hour procedure. That is done at the 7th hour. And therefore, the tamid is brought after that. So you need the musaf is always between 6 and 7, or during the 6th hour, right? And therefore, you do the zichin afterwards, and afterwards you do the tamid at Sheva Mechzen. Rabbi Kiva Savar B'zichin Kain Musafin. He says, no, you can make it earlier. Why? Because the B'zichin comes before the Musafin. So B'zichin B'chamesh, those are done during the 5th hour. Umusafin B'sheish, and therefore the Musaf is during the Sheish. So therefore, basically, after the 6 hours, right, then you're ready to go ahead and bring the Tamid, and therefore you can go ahead and bring it at the after 6.5 hours. So the mask of Rav Esakasha, Samidi Rabbi Kiva, Kasidro, Be'erev Pesach, Shachal Yais, Be'erev Shabbos Ketani. Understand? Does Rabbi Kiva say, right, that is just like, right, Kasidro, Erev Pesach, Shachal Yais, Be'erev Shabbos? Does he say? He says, right, does he say that Erev Pesach, right, that is just like when Erev Pesach falls on Erev Shabbos? It says Kasijo Erev Pesach stomach tani. It just says it's like when it falls out on Erev Pesach. It doesn't say that it's also Erev Shabbos. So Elam Rava gives his shot. The first one was Abaye. Now this is Rava. Rava says Hachi Komar Kasijo Bechol de Alma Kach Sijo B'Shabbos Be'erev Pesach. Right, just like during a weekday, right, that the way it's done during a weekday, right, is the when happens when Shabbos is Erev Pesach. So a weekday we said is 8.5, right? 8.5 is broad. So too, if Shabbos is Erev Pesach, it's also 8.5. Diva Rabbi Shmuel, it's been Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva Omer, Kasidro Be'erev Pesach. He says no. It's not like Shabbos Erev Pesach. Rather, it's the Seder of Erev Pesach, which, in other words, which would be an hour. It would be an hour earlier at the 7th hour. And therefore, it would be like Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva is the one who says it doesn't make a difference whether Shabbos or it's a weekdays or Pesach. Both times it's 7.5 hours. And therefore, what's the machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva? My kamifli. So b'michmar bisra kamifli. They're arguing as to the meat if it's spoiled, or if it will spoil. In other words, remember, you go ahead and you shecht if it is on Shabbos. If Shabbos is Erev Pesach, okay, so you shecht so basically, right, the first Seder night is Saturday night, right, which I think is this year, right? So you go shecht in the afternoon, but you can't roast it until the night. So if it's done too early, the meat might spoil. So we want a little bit later, so the meat won't spoil. And that's the machlokes there. Rabbi Shmuel savar chayshin lemichmar b'Yisra. According to Rabbi Shmuel, we're worried that perhaps the meat will go ahead and spoil. Rabbi Kiva savar lo chayshin lemichmar b'Yisra. Rabbi Kiva says, no, we're not worried about it. Therefore, it can be moved up an hour. It doesn't have to be at the eight and a half hours. Rather, we can move it up like a regular Erev Pesach to do at the 7.5 hour mark, and therefore that would be okay. Now, and Eloi Chashinan, now the B'Sheish Mechza. Well, if we're not worried about the meat spoiling, why didn't you even move it up? If it's Shabbos is Erev Pesach, why don't you even move it up at 6.5 hours? It's like a saver Musafin Kaidim the Bezichin. He holds that the Musaf is before the spoons, right? The Bezichin, right? And therefore Avilahu the Musafin B'Sheish, and therefore the Musaf is done at the 6th hour, right? And the Bezichin are done B'Sheva. Those are done in the 7th hour, and the Avilu Tamid, the Sheva Mechza. And therefore, the Tamid is done after that at 7.5 hours. So therefore, since he holds the Bezichin have to come before the Tamid, but after the Musafin. So therefore, it has to wait till 7.5 hours. Fine. That was shot number 2. However, it also doesn't necessarily stem right with that brisa, because Maskeva Rabbi Abba Bar Ula Midei Kasidro Bechol Kachsidro B'Shabbos Zera Pesach Diver B'Shmuel Ketani. Does it say, right, that the tamid on a regular day, right, which is 8.5 hours, is the same as Shabbos, right, which is Erev Pesach? Is that what it says, right? The Brisa says, right, basically Kasidra b'chol kach sidra b'Shabbos. It doesn't mention that Shabbos is Erev Pesach. It just mentions that chol is just like Shabbos, right? So this is what means to say Kasidra b'chol di alma, a regular weekday, i.e., a regular day when the tamid is brought 8.5 hours. Kach sidra b'Shabbos di alma is the same as a regular weekday. Now, there's nothing to do with Erev Pesach, right? It's not talking about Erev Pesach, right? In other words, just like during the week it's 8.5 hours, so to the tamid on Shabbos is also brought 8.5 hours, right? And Divi Rabbi Shmuel has been Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva Omer Kasidra b'Erev HaPesach di alma. Kach sidra b'Shabbos di alma. No, that just like Erev Pesach is an hour earlier, so too Shabbos is an hour earlier. That's the opinion of Masnisin, the Ketani bein b'chol bein Shabbos, Divrei, and the Mishnah says it doesn't make a difference whether it's Chol or Shabbos. Divrei HaKol is according to everybody, because now, according to one opinion, right, it's always so both of them hold that Shabbos, right, would be done at the what's it called? According to each one opinion, according to Rabbi Shmuel, right, a regular Shabbos is just like a Talmud, but it's not discussing Erev Pesach. So, and therefore, that which you say Erev Pesach a Shabbos is at 7.5 hours. Whether Erev Pesach is Shabbos or Erev Pesach is a weekday, it's always 7.5 hours. And therefore, our Mishnah, which says that Erev Pesach is moved up 1 hour, and it doesn't make a difference whether it's Shabbos or a weekday, it's 7.5 hours. It can be both like Rabbi Kiva and like Rabbi Shmuel. And therefore, what's the machlokas over here, right? It appears that they're arguing in a case of a regular Shabbos. So regular Shabbos, is it at the 8.5 hour mark, according to Rabbi Shmuel, like a regular day, or is it 7.5 hours, just like Erev Pesach? Which one? Which we according to Rabbi Kiva. So b'may kamifli, b'gezeros nadarim, nadavos nadarim kamifli. It's a machlokas between nadarim and basically the extra karbanos that people might need to bring. They come to the base of Mikdash, they bring it. That's Rabbi Shmuel, Savar, Gazrin, and Shabbos atuchol. We say just like during the weekdays, we want to go ahead and give extra time, and therefore we don't offer the tamid until the 8.5 hour mark. So to Shabbos, we don't want to confuse it, because if we move Shabbos up, maybe during the week they'll also move it up, and people won't have the opportunity to bring their nidarim and adavos. For Rabbi Kiva Saver loigazin, Rabbi Kiva says no, there is no gezerah. So v'ilo gazrina. So if there's no gezerah, if there's no gezerah, so why don't you do it at even earlier at the 6.5 hours? Why do you do it the 7.5 hours on Shabbos? If you don't have to bring any other karbanos after the musaf, you're done. So do it, bring the tamid at 6.5 hours and call it a day. It's like Savar Musafin Kaidim the Bezichin, the Musafin B'Sheish Bezichin B'Sheva, the Avilei L'Tamid B'Sheva Mechza. Therefore, no, because he holds the Bezichin come after the Musafin. Musafin are brought until the 6th hour. The 7th hour is Bezichin, and therefore only at 7.5 hours do they have the opportunity to go ahead and bring the Tamid. Fine. So that was the 3 opinions. Now we will have 2 kashas from 2 different brisas, and then we'll move on to a different sugya. So Meisavei. Tamid kol hashana kula karav kilchaso nishchat b'shmona umechza v'karav b'teisha umechza. The tamid throughout the year is shechted in the 8th hour, 8.5 hours, and is offered in 9.5 hours of Erev Pesach. When it comes to Erev Pesach, nishchad b'sheva mechza v'kara b'shmano mechza. It's shechted at the 7.5 hours, and it's offered at the 8.5 hours, and then all the psachim come afterwards. Chal yais b'Shabbos. If Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, i.e., Seder night is Saturday night, and therefore you have to bring it in the afternoon of Shabbos. Kechal yois b'sheni b'Shabbos. It's just like it's a Monday. Divi Rabbi Shmuel. In other words, you said Monday, right? We said Monday on Erev Shabbos is also at 7.5, right? Is right 7.5 to is shechted at 7.5. So too over here, this should be 7.5. Rabbi Kiva Aimer Kesidra Erev Pesach. So now it's Seder is like Erev Pesach. So the Gemara says, what's going on here, right? So this works according to Abaye, who we saw on the previous, because he said befavorish that according to Abaye was the first shah we said, that according to Abaye, that Rabbi Shmuel says it's no difference. Elo the Rava kasha, but according to Rava, it's a kasha. According to Rava, it was a kasha, right? Because Rava said he was worried about the meat spoiling, and therefore on Shabbos, it should actually be done later, not earlier, right? Shabbos should be done later and not brought up to 7.5 hours. It should be done 8.5 hours because we're worried about the meat spoiling. So Rava says, no. Don't say that it will be just like, right? That when it says over there, that if it's chal, that if Erev Pesach is chal Shabbos, it's just like if it falls out right on a Monday, right? Right. In other words, according to Rabbi, he would say like this. According to Rabbi, doesn't mean that it would be like a regular Erev Pesach, as if Erev Pesach fell on Monday, and therefore it's at 7.5 hours. Rather, it would be like a regular Monday during the year. Monday during the year, when is the Talmud brought? The standard day is 8.5 hours. So to Shabbos, normally Erev Pesach is 7.5 hours, but if it's Shabbos, then it'll be 8.5 hours because we're worried if it's done too early, the meat will spoil, according to Rabbi Shmuel. And Meisvei, one final kasha, Chal Yos b'Shabbos. If Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, Kesijo Kol Hashana Kula, Div Rabbi Shmuel. It's just like the rest of the year. And Rabbi Kiva Omer, Kesijo Erev Pesach Dialma, right? So it just, it would be the Seder of Erev Pesach Dialma. So it sounds like over here that according to Rabbi Shmuel, Bishlam the Rabbi Nicha, according to Rabbi Shmuel, it sounds like if it's Chal Yos b'Shabbos, it's just like if Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos. In other words, it's the regular Seder would be like the regular year when it's brought during the later hour. And Rabbi Kiva would say, Kasija of Erev Pesach Dialma. No, it's brought earlier. Shabbos is done earlier. So Bishlam Rabbi Nicha, according to Rabbi Shmuel, works out well because it was brought according to Rabbi Shmuel. El Abaye, but according to Abaye, Kasha, because according to Abaye, over here, because he holds that according to Rabbi Shmuel, it's we had done it at 7.5 hours, and over here it seems to say Rabbi Shmuel would say it's just like the Talmud of the regular year, which is about 8.5 hours. So don't say it's just like any other day of the year, i.e. 8.5 hours. Rather, it means like it's any other Erev Pesach, right? Any other Pesach, i.e. Shabbos doesn't make a difference. It's brought at 7.5 hours, just like any Erev Pesach. Divi Rabbi Shmuel, it's been Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Kiva Omer, Kesija Erev Pesach shel Shechal Yais Erev Shabbos. No, it would be like an Erev Pesach that fell out on Erev Shabbos, i.e., everything had to be completely roasted before Shabbos, and therefore we need maximum time, and therefore it has to be done not even at 7.5 hours, but even an hour earlier at the 6.5 hour mark. Fine. So that was the machlokas we had to discuss. Erev Pesach at what time the Talmud is brought, because remember the Talmud depends because you have to roast the you have to offer the Korban Pesach afterwards, and the question is how much time do we need, and also depending if that day you can roast it itself, i.e. it's a weekday, or if that day is Shabbos, then it's only roasted once Pesach starts, and then you roast it, I guess, while after it starts. So Tanur Rabbanan. So minayin shelo yeh davar kaidem l'tamid shel shachar. How do we know that nothing should be brought before the Talmud in the morning is brought? Is the first thing in the morning? Nothing should be brought before that. So it says over there, Talmud loymar v'orech alel ha'oila. It says over there, he shall go ahead, and after he goes ahead and he deals with the fire that was from overnight, and he sets up the fire. Then on that he should bring the ola, right? What is ola? Samai Talmuda. What's lima? Samarava ha'oila ola rishon means the ola, i.e. the tamid that's brought the one that's brought every day, which is the carbon tummy. So Menayin Shein Davar Karev Achar Tummy Shel Bein Abayim. How do we know? Okay, we have nothing before the morning one. How do we know we cannot bring anything after the afternoon one? So Tamalayimar, therefore it says Vehikter Allah Chalve Hashlam. Right? He says over there, and you shall go ahead and you burn. He's still referring to the morning one. You shall burn on it the Chalve Shlamim. So my Talmud, Rabbi Allah Shlamim V'lo Chaver Tishlamim. In other words, after the morning Talmud is when you bring the other Shlamim, the other karbanas, but you can't bring any shlamim, any other offerings after the Bein Arbaim. So only after the morning one and not the afternoon one, telling you the afternoon one is the last one of the day. Maybe it just means that shlamim you can't bring after the tummy Bein Arbaim, but maybe I can bring olos after Bein Arbaim. So Marava, hashlamim, Allah hashleim kol karbanos. When it says hashlamim, it means that this should be the hashleim, this should be the finishing of all the karbanos of the day, and therefore nothing is brought after the Tamid Ben Arbaim. All right, we'll stop here at the bottom. Like I said, difficult sugyas. Now we're going into kachim. Everybody have a wonderful day, and we will see you guys the normal time tomorrow. Mitzvah Shem. Take care.
All right, go.